In this video, I'm drawing on my life experience before seasonal decor, before YouTube, and that is my 30 plus year career in the travel industry. I worked both as a travel agent in leisure and corporate or business sales, as well as airline ground crew. And in those years, I learned things that I still use every single time I travel today. Not because I'm an anxious traveller or because travel just somehow feels more complicated these days, but when you work behind the scenes in these industries, you get insights, you learn habits, things that are useful for you for traveling for the rest of your life. Some of these will bring your ideal trip to life, and some of them will just make the journey feel like a breeze. One of the first things I learned as a junior travel agent way back in the day was that my role in helping my clients find their ideal trip or their ideal holiday was very similar to that of a matchmaker. You are basically taking your client's wish list, you're taking what they value most, what doesn't really matter to them, what they're prepared to compromise on, and you are trying to find them the perfect match. And that principle has stayed with me to this day. And when I'm picking my destination or my resort or my hotel or even my airline, I still treat it very much like a matchmaking service. And I suppose when you think about it, you could think of, going on a trip, it's a bit like going on a blind date. You have all these expectations and, things that you value and things that it doesn't really matter too much about, except I suppose that you're not picking a partner for life. But if you get it wrong, you could be stuck there for a week or 2 weeks in a match that doesn't really suit you. So thinking about it like you're picking a partner is really how you should go about picking a holiday or picking your destination or picking your trip. So that's one thing I learned that has definitely stuck with me to this day. And talking of travel agents, that brings me on to my next point, and that is whether or not to actually use a travel agent to book your trips. I use a travel agent strategically. I don't use them for everything that I do, but I do use them probably for more complicated itineraries or for longer trips or where there are multiple destinations and a lot of moving parts involved. I love going online and scrolling through all the debates that are out there, whether it's here on YouTube or over on Instagram or wherever. And everyone's got an opinion about whether you should use a travel agent or not. And a lot of people have this misconception that you have to pay to use the services of a travel agent. Now, there may be some higher end concierge type travel services where, I don't know, maybe they do charge a fee for certain services. But for your average travel agent, they do not charge their clients to use their services. They don't earn their money that way. They earn their money in commissions from airlines, from the holiday companies, hotels, etc., that they send clients to. That's how they earn their fees. Or in corporate travel, it's a little bit different. But in leisure travel, booking your holidays, booking your leisure trips, that is how they work. And so I find it endlessly fascinating when there's this huge debate online of people saying, oh no, you can save a lot of money by not using a travel agent. What I know to be true is that travel agents will get amazing deals from the flights, from the airline companies they work with, from the hotel companies they work with, because they are booking in bulk and because they are, sending a lot of passengers and travelers towards that particular airline, and they will get incredible deals. And the only way that you can tap into those deals is by working with that travel agent. So that is definitely one of the reasons that I will use a travel agent, because if I want to, I don't know, like upgrade my flight. Say I want to really treat myself and maybe travel business class. That travel agent will have some amazing business class fares with a particular airline I am not going to get if I just go directly to that airline and try and book it. So accessing deals for higher end things, whether it's a higher end hotel or maybe an upgraded class on a flight, those are the times again that I will go and use a travel agent. But if it's just something, run of the mill, like I just booked a trip for some girls, we're going away on a girls getaway, it's a budget airline, it's a middle of the road hotel, I actually got a really good deal by just going to the hotel website and booking that directly. I didn't feel the need to use a travel agent for that type of trip. But I took a trip in January out to Asia, which involved multiple flights, multiple hotels, lots of moving parts, moving about from place to place. And absolutely, I used a travel agent for that because I wanted them to pull everything together. I didn't want to be overwhelmed by the choice of things going to a part of the world that I knew nothing about. I got them to narrow down the hotel choice for me. Like I say, I talked about a matchmaking service. I told them what my priorities were. I told them what I liked, what I didn't like, and they presented me with 3 or 4 hotels in each of the destinations for the budget that I said, with my wish list in mind. And that just made it a lot easier. And they also were able to provide a service where they gave me a car transfer going from the airport to the hotel, then picking up from the hotel back to the airport. Now, sure, I could have used taxis for all of that, but sometimes it's just nice to have that all arranged for you. It comes up in the app, what time you're getting picked up, who the car service is. That's just a nice to have that you can get, booking through a travel agent. So, as I say, knowing how they work makes it easier to decide when to use a travel agent and when not to, when you can just kind of book it for yourself. Now, of course, the other advantage of booking with a travel agent, especially for those more complicated itineraries, is that if something does go wrong, then you've got a single point of contact. These days, they usually have an app messaging service. You don't even have to phone them, where you can just make contact and say, look, this flight's been cancelled, or I don't know, there's a problem at this hotel, and someone else can fix it for you. I have to say that I am very aware that, like I said, travel agents have got all these deals with different hotels or different airlines. And of course, you need to be aware that they may be guiding you towards a particular airline or a particular hotel chain, say, because they get a better commission with that particular chain of hotels. But I think as long as you know that and you're aware of that and you're okay with that, I mean, does it really matter if you stay in a Marriott instead of a Hilton? Unless you've got a Hilton membership, in which case you're going to say to them, right off the bat, I want to use Hilton hotels, I don't want to use Marriott. So just having that awareness of how the travel agents work, how they earn their money, has definitely influenced how I book my travel and whether I choose to use a travel agent to book my trip or not. I'd love to know, are you team travel agent? Do you use a travel agent for all your travel, like me, maybe just some of your travel, or do you just book absolutely everything yourself? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to have another conversation about it. Another habit that I definitely rely on, particularly when I'm booking flights these days, is to make sure that you've got what we used to call a logical itinerary. And for that, I mean, you know what it's like. If you're booking your own flight, you hop onto one of those comparison websites, you put in, your dates, you're from, you're to, and it brings you up a whole list of options. And you focus on the cheapest one and you click on that and you're about to book it. And maybe you do even go ahead and book it and then realize that it's got you changing about 3 times, you're hopping back to go forward, you've got, an 8-hour layover, all of the things. So it's just really important to make sure before you commit to something that you're aware of all those things. Sometimes we've got 2 different airports that we can leave from. You've maybe got a more local one and bigger international ones slightly further away, whatever. Even to the point of looking at how long the whole journey is going to take from when you leave your home to when you arrive at your destination. It's worth taking a look at that and just make sure that your option is logical. And of course, awareness is everything, because you might make a conscious decision to save a lot of money by adding an extra stop into your itinerary or whatever. That's absolutely fine. I do the same sometimes too. But the point is to be aware of it and just make sure that you are checking, all the different parts of the itinerary, the length of each flight, the length of the stopover, etc., just to make sure that you know what you're seeing saying yes to. And the other thing to be aware of, and again, this is something that I learned through working, in the industry, is that sometimes that you might have a preferred airline and you see a flight advertised with a flight number for your preferred airline, and you go ahead and book it and then find out that the flight is not operated by that airline at all. And that's because the airlines work together in groups, sometimes called airline alliances, and they all carry flight numbers for each other's flight. So you might book a flight with a British Airways flight number and find out that the actual aircraft operating the flight is from American Airlines. So again, just make sure that you don't get caught out with that one. And if you're booking with a travel agent, just make sure to ask the travel agent which airline is actually going to be operating the flight that you're about to book on. So you've decided on the trip and you've gone ahead and booked it. The next thing is to absolutely make sure that when your confirmation comes through, and these days it generally comes in the form of an email, that you check it meticulously and make sure that the trip that you've booked is actually the trip that you wanted to book. So many times, I can't tell you how many times working back in the day, we would book flights for someone and then maybe 6 months in advance of their trip, and then the day before they were due to travel, when they dug out their confirmation and looked at it, there would be an error. Now, we're all humans. That could have been an error on the part of the agent that booked it. It might have been that the passenger gave them the wrong information. It could have been a typo that's put a spelling error into the passenger's name. It could be because of a whole range of reasons. But the point is that we're now 24 hours before travel, which makes it a heck of a lot more difficult to sort out than if the person concerned had just checked the confirmation email when it had come through to them, at least within 24 hours of receiving it. So a big, big lesson that I learned back in the day that I still do to this day: check your confirmations. So you've booked your trip and now you're about to set off on the journey. And one of the first things that I think I learned working as airline ground crew is that aircraft is not going to wait for you if you are the one running late. And I think I saw it so many times where people would, plonk themselves down in a cafe, lose track of time, and then, not make it to the gate in time. That flight is just not going to wait for you because they are operating to a strict timetable. Similarly, if you've got a really, really tight connection, even if that airline knows that you're on your way from your connecting flight, they'll wait as long as they can, but they need to get that aircraft away on time. And yeah, they are going to go without you. And it's especially true if you have just cabin baggage only, if you've not got any bags checked in on the flight. Now, they will offload your luggage if you've got delayed in the airport somewhere. And trust me, these days, it's a lot easier to offload the luggage than it was back in my day. Things are a lot more, I think, digitally controlled, and they've got a much better idea of exactly where that person's bags are on that flight, I think, from, when I back in my day. But the important lesson here is don't allow yourself to get sidetracked as you move through the airport. A lot of airports maybe, work in a different way, especially if you're overseas somewhere. I was at an airport recently, somewhere in Asia. I can't remember which one of the airports it was. And you didn't go through the security part. You didn't put your bags through the screening part until you were actually at the gate, literally about to board the flight. Now, it was smooth sailing for us. There wasn't a big long queue or anything, but there could have been. And so my journey through that airport, I was constantly aware, hang on a minute, we haven't gone through the security part. We haven't, had our bags screened yet. So I was always mentally building in time, to allow that to happen. So really important, don't think that that aircraft is going to wait for you, because it just isn't. Now, with all that said, again, contrary to popular belief, the airline does want you to make that flight. Trust me, it's a lot more work for them when you don't, because they then have to, either offload your bags, or they have to help you book another flight, you become a problem standing in front of them when you miss that flight. So they do want you to make that flight, and they will absolutely do all possible to get you onto that aircraft. But it's usually the captain's decision. They will radio through to the captain and say, or radio through to the aircraft, the dispatcher, and say, I've got the passengers at the gate, we've got the late missing passengers, and it's the captain's say so whether you actually get to board that flight or not. It's not the agent standing at the gate. Also, another thing I would say is if you are running late and you get to, say, a security point, don't stand at the back of the queue. Respectfully go up to the front of the line and say, oh, we're running late, our flight's leaving in 20 minutes. Is there any way at all that, you could help us? And as I say, the airport staff and the airline staff, they want you to make that flight because otherwise you become their problem. So, they might be able to scoot you through the crew line or find a quick way through security or whatever. So it's definitely always, always worth asking. Yeah, they do want you to make that flight, but don't, assume that you are definitely getting on it if just because you're running late. Another lesson from back in those days that I heavily rely on these days is to be absolutely meticulous about my travel documents. I saw so many trips ruined before they could even get started because people either forgot their passport. I still don't know how that happens, but people do it. Forgot their passport was out of date, they didn't have the appropriate visas to arrive, in the country that they were travelling to. And what you might not realise is that when a passenger arrives in a country that they don't have the appropriate visa or documentation for, and they're not allowed into that country, they ultimately get deported. And the airline gets fined for putting that passenger on the flight without the appropriate documentation. So as a ground agent working for the airlines on the ground, it was your absolute dread if a passenger got deported, and you heard about it, the first thing you were thinking was, oh my Lord, did I check them into that flight and put them on that flight and they didn't have the right documentation, because the airline gets a huge fine for doing that. So it's really important that the agents that are checking you in are checking your passport, checking that you've got all the right visas and documentation. And the one visa that quite often catches people out is what's called a transit visa. So people forget that you don't only have to check whether you need visas for your final destination, but you also might need a visa simply to go through the airport of another country. And that is one that definitely catches some people out. Now, even if you book through a travel agent, you will notice that they will say it is the passenger's own responsibility to make sure that they have the appropriate documentation for this trip. Yes, they will quite often give you advice, and with the more obvious ones where you definitely need a visa, they might prompt you and say, have you got your visa sorted, whatever. For most of it, they are going to leave that entirely up to the passenger. And I suppose it's because visa restrictions and, visa rules and things can change. They're constantly changing. So when you book with your travel agent, maybe 6 months ahead of the trip, if they gave you that visa advice, 6 months ago, that might not still be valid now. And they certainly don't want to get into a situation where they are constantly having to update you with that information. So they just make it a blanket rule that it is the passenger's own responsibility to do that. So continually on the run up to your trip, especially if it's somewhere a bit more unusual, be continually checking that the rules haven't changed, that you don't suddenly need a visa now when you didn't when you booked the trip. But yeah, making sure that you've got all your ducks in a row where documentation is concerned. Big lesson that I still carry with me to this day. And if you're getting something out of this video, I would love for you to join me a bit more regularly in this little corner of YouTube, where we're all about thriving in this later season of life. And let me know in the comments, have you been caught out by any of the things that I've been chatting about in the video today? What's your travel style? Now, here's something that you might not know unless you've got insider knowledge, and that is that in a situation where there's a problem and you're presented with a solution that appears to be the only solution, it often isn't, and you're able and quite within your rights to ask for an alternative. So let's just say that you've booked a flight and you've treated yourself, you've maybe upgraded the class to maybe premium economy or maybe even business class, and you turn up to drop your bags off and they tell you that unfortunately you can't be accommodated in your booked class today because either there's been a change of aircraft that's got a lower number of seats on it in that class, or maybe even the airlines oversold your class and they say we're having to downgrade you, and they will offer you compensation, to make up for that, but you don't have to accept that as being the only thing that you can do. You could say to the airline, well, okay, when is the next available flight that you can get me seats on the class that I booked? Or can you give me flights with a short stopover on the class that I booked? Because let's face it, if you've booked a higher class, and especially if it's a long haul flight and you're expecting to be a bit more comfortable for that flight, no amount of compensation is often going to make up for the fact that you're not going to get that. So ask what alternatives are available. Also ask if there's another airline that they can put you on. Now, they probably won't want to do this because in a lot of cases, that will cost the airline more to do that. Ask. There's no harm in asking, especially if it's maybe, I keep using this example because it's an airline alliance that I'm familiar with. Let's say you booked a British Airways flight and this happens, and you know that there's an American Airlines flight that leaves an hour later. BA and American are in the same alliance, so maybe they will be able to do something for you, but it's always worth asking the question. Similarly, if you check into a hotel and the hotel room that you're given doesn't quite suit for whatever reason, ask how much it would be to upgrade the room, if maybe the higher classroom is just going to suit you a lot better, or just ask if there's another room available in the same class that you've booked. We had a recent experience in a hotel where we checked into the hotel and the room was absolutely the class of room that we'd booked, but it just was very, very small with not a lot of storage space. And we were on a big trip, so we did have a lot of luggage. And we went back and just asked, was there an alternative room? They showed us a room one floor above. And because the bathroom layout was completely different, there was a lot more space in the actual room with bizarrely a lot more cupboard and drawer space. Exactly the same grade of room, and the hotel were more than happy to give us this other room because the bottom line is they want their guests to be happy. And, asking if there's another room available is absolutely fine. It's absolutely okay. People do it all the time. But I think unless you've worked behind the scenes in these industries, you don't know that people ask these questions all the time and that it is a perfectly reasonable request. So don't always take the first thing that you're offered. Ask if there's something different. But the way you ask brings me on to the next point. Look, this next lesson feels like a kind of no-brainer to me, and that is, always be respectful to the people that you are dealing with, whether it's in an airport or in a hotel or wherever. And like I say, it feels like a no-brainer because I can't imagine any of you behaving the way that I have seen people behave. I think the lesson that I took from my days working in that environment that I do carry forward now. Of course, be respectful, but the lesson I think is how incredibly stressful travel can become in certain circumstances. And even when you are the kind of person that I would consider that I am, that you probably consider you are, and asked here and now, you would say, I would never behave like that. But sometimes when you're in that extremely stressful situation where you feel like you're about to miss a flight, that the consequences of such would be fairly catastrophic. We used to say that sometimes people just left their brains outside the door of the airport and seemed like they became a different kind of person when they walked through the door. And so I think the lesson is to keep repeating to yourself that raising your voice to somebody, becoming that kind of person, never, ever, ever gets you the result that you want. And so I think the lesson becomes more about just being conscious of how easy it is to get triggered in these situations, and just keep talking to yourself. Just, calm down, stay logical, don't raise your voice to this person, even though your insides are screaming because somebody is being really slow at doing something and it's holding you up and you need to get to the gate, or whatever, or, something's gone wrong and your flight's been cancelled, whatever it is. Even though you believe you would never become the person that shouts and yells and stamps their feet, I have seen it happen with people that I would think in their everyday life would never behave like that. So, yeah, let's say that that's the lesson. Just keep that in your mind. Always be respectful to the person that you're dealing with, because trust me, when you are that airline employee or airport employee and someone is in a terrible situation and they're being extra nice to you and they are saying thank you so much for everything, I really appreciate everything that you're trying to do for me here, you will go the extra mile to help that person in whatever way you can. But none of these things that I'm sharing with you today are about, taking control of everything or trying to outsmart the system. It's just that what I've realized over the years, working in the industry, is that there are a lot of moving parts involved in going on a trip, going from A to B. And honestly, it can be a bit of a miracle when everything happens seamlessly and there are no issues whatsoever. And at the heart of this channel really is about, thriving in this kind of third act of life. And travel is a really big part of that for me. And I do get really sad to see people in this stage of life who just say, I'm done with travel, it's too stressful, I just can't do it anymore. And that does make me a bit sad, because I think that you can have it all. You can stay curious, you can still travel, you can still create those memories and get all the enrichment that traveling does bring. And these are just all the lessons that let me do that calmly, confidently, and with a lot of gratitude. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.